What's up, everybody, and welcome to the Insurrection Inc. podcast. We want to thank you for listening, and we hope you enjoy the show.
Just a quick note before we start the show. We recorded over Zoom with Dr. Block, and there were a few technical difficulties throughout the episode. So if there are a few seconds of silence when he's speaking or when we're speaking, then just bear with us and enjoy the show. Oh, we're live.
Welcome to the Insurrection Inc. podcast. I'm Stratty. Joining me today is Jay, Tim, Monty, Porter, and our boy Andrew will not be joining us today because he was on the front lines and down south spreading the ANCAP message on the ground. But our guest today is the author of over 500 plus peer-reviewed articles for academic journals, as well as thousands of newspaper and magazine op-eds to go along with his some 24 books authored, including the cult classic, Defending the Undefendable. He is a professor of economics at the University of Loyola and a senior fellow at the Ludwig von Mises Institute. Please join me in welcoming to the show Dr. Walter Block.
Stratty, I'm sorry to say, but every once in a while your voice doesn't come through. Is that the experience of you other guys? Are you having trouble with Stratty also?
Yeah, it's a little unavoidable.
Okay, well then we'll just press on. Okay,
I'll fix
Stratty,
it.
Thanks.
Y'all just work on the.
Thanks.
Porter has a question.
Thanks for the kind introduction.
Very welcome. Welcome to the show.
I wanted to start off. With the first question, and so you're an anarcho-capitalist, and I agree with a lot of the ideas, like the fully developed legal system, stuff like that. But one thing that always gets me, one thing that always seems to blindside libertarians, is this one question that everyone thinks we can't answer for some reason. And that is, who would build the roads?
Well, one of my books is on that entire subject, so I've got a whole book on that. The way I would answer that, good job, because some 40,000 people a year die on the roads. And, they say, well, death and taxes and road fatalities are inevitable and has to happen. And then they start saying, well, it's not really the government's fault. It's really the fault of drunken driving or speeding or texting or vehicle malfunction or driver inattention. They come up with whole bunches of reasons why the death rate is so horrendous. Causes. For example, if we were called in to analyze why a restaurant went broke, and we started saying, well, it was the fault of the location. They didn't locate it on a place where people could get to it easily, or the place wasn't clean, or the food didn't taste good, or the waitress wasn't a good waitress. We would realize that that's not, those are the proximate causes of the fatalities, but the ultimate cause is the manager. Or I now take a gun, here's a gun, and I shoot the guy out on the street, and you guys grab me and arrest me. And I say, Tut, it wasn't me, it was the bullet. Well, that's just silly. Of course it was the bullet, it was the proximate cause, but I'm the ultimate cause. So I'm the one who is responsible. Well, it's the government who's responsible for not stopping drunken driving, for not stopping speeding or inattention or whatever it is that's causing deaths. Not during the pandemic when there's no cars out there, but ordinarily, I live in New Orleans, and to go from one place to another during the rush hour, morning or evening, is an adventure. So how would the roads be built? Private people would build the roads. The idea here is that if you have competition, you have a better product. Well, right now there's no competition. When the death rate is horrendous, does the government go broke? No. Whereas if Porter and Stratton, you had roads, and Porter's road was much better than Stratton's, well, Stratton's would lose money, Porter would gain money, and Porter would be able to expand his road holdings, and Stratton would have to go into a different business. So this is the idea. I'm just trying to apply ordinary economic understanding to an an exotic interest or an exotic topic, and the exotic topic is roads. I guess half of my book is how would it work, and the other half of the book is all sorts of objections that people say, well, the road owner would trap people in their houses and wouldn't let them out unless they paid $1 million. And I have maybe 30 objections which I deal with. So my short answer, well, it's already a long answer, but my short answer, I could go on longer, is private enterprise would build the roads just like private enterprise builds pretty much everything else.
Yeah, thank you. I obviously that question was a little bit of a joke because I knew you had written a book about it. But, there are some people who genuinely don't know how to answer that question. That's always one of the first things that pops up. So it's good to have, a short condensed answer like that. And would definitely recommend your book to people wanting to know more.
Yeah, whenever I'm having that discussion with somebody, if I get frustrated, I always tell them, you know what, I'm going to buy you Walter Block's book on it. It's a couple hundred pages. It'll explain everything for you. So I have a question. One of the most interesting pieces I've read from you was your article on Bitcoin and the regression theorem, because cryptocurrency is a very hot topic, especially for me. And it was very enlightening to see how you explained the regression theorem and how people who look at Bitcoin against it are actually looking at the wrong things. So if you could just explain the article real quick and maybe tell us your outlook on cryptocurrency as a prospect for liberty.
Well, let me give a long-winded answer there too. Why do we need money in the first place? The reason we need money in the first place is because we have to have specialization and division of labor. Because if we didn't have specialization and division of labor and we had to produce everything for ourselves, most of us would all die. So we have to specialize. But if we specialize and, you make shoes and I'm a plumber, well, you can't eat shoes and I can't eat plumbing. And let's say Stratty is a farmer. Well, he needs a plow and he needs other things to grow the food. So we have to trade with each other. But then you have this thing called the double coincidence of wants. For example, I have a pickle and I want a chicken. The odds of me finding someone who's got a chicken and wants a pickle, horrendously small. So what I'll do is I want a chicken and I have pickles. I'll trade my pickles in for salt or sugar or something that everyone wants. And then I will go and buy the chicken. So I make 2 trades instead of 1 to overcome this double coincidence of wants. So what should be the money? Should it be sugar? Should it be pickles? Should it be salt, fish hooks, rocks, what? Well, it can't be bananas because bananas rot. It can't be diamonds because if you can't make change you can make change in diamonds, but if you do, you ruin most of the value of the diamond because a big diamond is worth way more than 10 small diamonds of equal size or equal weight. It can't be cement because cement isn't worth that much and you don't want to lug around 100 pounds of cement all the time. So whenever there was a freedom, when people were free to choose, we devolved on copper, on silver, on gold. So the free enterprise position is not really the gold standard. It's rather whatever the market chooses. And if the market picks platinum next time, that's okay. But we call it the gold standard because typically most people devolved upon gold. It's really valuable. You can make change in it. You can cut it easily. You can tell fake gold from not fake gold. So I'm a gold standard person. It's interesting, Milton Friedman had this free to choose series and yet whenever people were free to choose, they chose gold, and yet he's against gold. So go figure. Okay, so I favor the gold standard. What about cryptocurrency? Well, I have a hierarchy. Gold standard is first, cryptocurrency is second, and then fiat currency comes last. Why does the government want to have fiat currency? Well, because the government needs money for, doing its wonderful things. And there are only 3 ways that the government can get money. The problem, one is taxes. Well, everyone knows who's taxing. You can't blame, even Bernie Sanders isn't going to blame private enterprise on taxes. Even he doesn't do that. And second is borrowing, and AOC doesn't blame the private enterprise for government borrowing. Well, the third one is printing up money or creating it through the Fed. And this is a complicated issue, and most people don't realize what's going on, so they can blame the greedy capitalists for inflation. So the government wants to have fiat currency, and fiat currency is the worst thing. Now, how do I place cryptocurrency in there? I place it in the middle. Better than fiat currency, but not as good as gold. Why? Because whenever people were free to choose, they chose gold. They never chose a cryptocurrency, and cryptocurrency is not yet a money. Because a money is defined as that which is universally acceptable or acceptable by virtually everyone. Well, you can't go into a store and buy a pair of shoes for cryptocurrency, whereas you can't do it for gold, but you can do it for money, because fiat currency is money. So that's one problem with cryptocurrency. It's not as widespread as it could be. Another serious problem is if there's no electricity, there's no cryptocurrency. That's a serious practical problem. I mean, you can have a generator, but if things go badly, we can still trade. Most of the people can live. Whereas with cryptocurrency, it depends upon electricity, and electricity is not as secure as it should be. Whereas with gold, you don't need electricity for it. So I'm a big fan of cryptocurrency. I think cryptocurrency is good. Any alternative to government currency is a good idea. But I'd rather have the gold standard because, as I say, when people were free to choose, they chose gold. Now, Milton Friedman's argument against it is it costs money. Well, so do fences and locks cost money, but they're a protection against government or criminals, but I repeat myself here. So I'm a fan of free enterprise money, and cryptocurrency is second place, whereas fiat currency would be third place, in my view.
All right.
Speaking of free enterprise money, we interviewed David last weekend, and he talked a little bit about his opinions on fractional reserve banking. And I disagree with him on the economics of it a little bit. But one point he made that I agree on, this narrow point, is that he thinks it's not fraud. And so far I've been convinced by the arguments that it isn't fraud, but he brought up your name specifically, along with Hans Hermann Hoppe and, of course, Rothbard, as people who would disagree with that. So I wanted to ask you, convince me otherwise, why is fractional reserve banking fraud?
Well, what is fractional reserve banking first? Well, fractional reserve banking is a situation where I deposit $100 in Porter's bank, and Porter keeps a fraction of 10%. So we started out with 100, and now what does Porter do for me? He gives me a checking deposit or a checking account or something like that, and I can now come in there and write a check for $100 because I deposited $100. And then Porter, what he does is he takes $90 and he lends it out to Stratton, and he gives Stratton also a checking deposit. And now there's $190 worth of money, which we started out with just 100. And through the magic of fractional reserve banking, we've increased the money supply to a great degree. So what's gonna happen now if both of us come and try to get our money? Well, Porter's only got $10 and he's got $190 outstanding, which is a problem. Right now, in New Orleans, where I live, there are, say, 500,000 cars. How many titles to cars are there? 500,000 titles to cars. The idea is you can't have more titles to property than there is property, and yet fractional reserve banking has more titles to property than there's property. Because now there's titles to $190 and there was only 100. So we created money out of the thin air. Now, it's not fraud in the sense, we'll make the best case for fractional reserve banking. Everyone knows what's going on. Because if people don't know what's going on, then you could say, well, then it's easy, then it's fraud. And there are surveys asking people, do you know what's going on with fractional reserve banking? And most people can't even pronounce it, let alone know what's going on. So as a practical matter, it's very fraudulent. But David Friedman is making a theoretical case. Is it fraudulent or not? Well, you see, the way David is looking at it he's saying, well, the basis of the free enterprise system is contract. Because we've all agreed. I deposited my $100 in Porter's bank, and I agreed that, and I knew that Porter would be a fractional reserve banker, and he knew that I knew, and I knew that he knew, and then he lent money to Stratton, and Stratton knew it also. So everybody is knowledgeable. So it's not fraud in the sense of psychology, in the sense that everyone knew it. However, there's something more basic than contract, and what's more basic than contract is property rights. And property rights are much more basic than contract, because contract is predicated on property rights. And you can't have more property titles than there is property. Now, suppose I made a different contract with you, Porter. I'll sell you a, a square circle. Here's a square circle, and you know, we can draw a square circle. Well, it's hard to draw a square circle because it's a contradiction. Well, is that fraud, even if we know it? Well, yeah, it's sort of a fraud, even if we know it, because we know there's no such thing as square circles. So what I'm trying to say is that philosophically, the fractional reserve banking is sort of like a square circle. Yes, we can say, I've just given, hey, I'll give you a square circle for $10. Do you agree? Well, I mean, the whole thing is silly. You can't agree or disagree to sell a square circle or buy a square circle, because there, not only is there no such thing as a square circle like a pink elephant, there could be a pink elephant, but there can't be a square circle, and buying and selling these things. So what I'm saying is, having more titles to property than there's property is sort of like a square circle from a point of view of property rights. So that would be my answer to David.
That actually makes a lot of sense. That was pretty convincing, especially the square circle argument. Yeah.
All right, Professor
Hey,
Block,
when am I going to get some easy questions out of you guys?
Well, I'm fixing to throw a curveball your way. So one of our listeners, he wanted to ask you, what would we do with nukes in the case that we did get rid of government?
What will we do with which?
Government nukes.
News? N-E-W?
Nukes.
Oh, no, nuclear weapons.
Nuclear
nukes,
weapons. Yeah.
Nukes. Sorry.
My bad.
I gotta, understand what the question is. If it's news, N-E-W-S, or nudes, N-E-W-S. But no, it's not nudes, and it's not news. It's nukes. Great. We're connecting. It's important.
Well, what will we do with the government news also? What are we going to do with people who try to sell us war? What do we do with them?
Right. Well, it's an interesting thing that Donald Trump is very unhappy. First I'll answer the question about news, and then I'll talk about nukes. Donald Trump is very unhappy, and quite rightly so, because the mainstream, except for the Wall Street Journal and one or two others, is very bitterly opposed to him. And he's always saying, this is horrible, and he's trying to sue the newspapers for, for being not nice to him. And I just wrote an op-ed on that, and I said, look, Donald, the newspaper industry is easy to enter. There's no law against it. It's hard to enter competition with taxi cabs because Uber, they're always trying to get rid of Uber. It's hard to enter the field of, Airbnb because the hotels don't like it. It's hard to become a doctor because you have to go through all sorts of rigmarole to become a doctor. But you can set up your own newspaper. And you've got enough money, you can set up a newspaper. So, stop whining and go set up your own newspaper or your own TV kind of a thing. So that my answer on news, as opposed to nudes and nukes, is it's a relatively free industry. It's true that 99, I once got into an argument with somebody about news, and he said, well, and I was saying that newspapers, along with Hollywood and the universities, are very left-wing. And he said, no. There are more newspapers that are right-wing than are left-wing. And he had in mind, the Daily Bugle from, Duckburg or something, which has 3 journalists. And I said, well, yes, if you're going to count newspapers, it's a right-wing institution. But if you're going to count journalists, I mean, the New York Times must have 3,000 or 30,000 employees, and the Duckburg Gazette has only got 3. So the newspapers and Hollywood and the universities are very, very left-wing. And if Donald doesn't like it, let him set up his own instead of suing them for not being nice to him. Okay, now for nukes. What's the libertarian view on nuclear weapons? Well, Murray Rothbard, who I'm a big fan of is an understatement of the century. He's my mentor, he's my guru, he was a friend of mine. I'm the only person that ever co-authored anything with him, so I'm very proud to say that. And by the way, I have the Rothbard Medal of Freedom, and he doesn't. He was never awarded the Rothbard Medal of Freedom. I was, so I got it over Murray. Murray said that the problem with a nuclear weapon is that it can't be confined narrowly to the bad guys. It blows up everybody. So a nuclear weapon would be improper. And my son and I wrote this article saying, well, there's an exception. For example, when we colonized Jupiter, and everybody has land holdings of 100,000 square miles, if you want to have a nuclear weapon right in the middle of it, God bless. Because then, then you get the problem. Well, suppose it's not a nuclear weapon. It's just or I'm not going to use it. I'm going to just keep it in my basement in New Orleans because I like to contemplate the weapon. Well, that's a threat. Having and also a bunch of dynamite. You can't keep dynamite. And I think that's proper, that the government prohibits people from keeping masses of dynamite in your basement or, in your house when there are neighbors all around. So except for Jupiter, you shouldn't be able to have a nuclear weapon. Now, can you have a tank? Can you have all sorts of armor? Can you have the guns that the government is always trying to get rid of? Yes, because those can be confined to bad guys. Now, they're always saying, well, you don't need these super duper weapons to shoot a deer. You only need a rifle that shoots 1 bullet at a time. You don't need machine guns. And they say, but the whole point of the Second Amendment had nothing to do with shooting deer. It had to do with defending yourself against tyrants, government tyrants. It's true they only had muskets, and then there were some people who said, well, okay, if you want to have a musket, you can have a musket. But the whole point is that the government only had muskets then. So you want to have some sort of equality. Look at Venezuela. Look at North Korea. Look at Cuba. Do we really want to disarm all the people? Wouldn't it be nice if the people could overthrow Maduro or the bad guys in Cuba or North Korea or China or the USSR or wherever it was? So I think we libertarians have the view that the Second Amendment is a very nice amendment, and we should be armed on an equal basis with the government, except for nuclear power. They have nuclear power and nuclear weapons. And by the way, the U.S. is exceptional. We're the only ones. I shouldn't say we. They are the only ones who ever dropped 2 of them on Hiroshima and Nagasaki. And now they're holier than thou, the government of the United States, and nobody should have it, and only they should have it. So that would be sort of my riff on nuclear weapons. That nuclear weapons are per se an invasion because they can't be confined to guilty people. That they have to impact everyone, at least on this earth.
Very insightful answer. I wasn't really even expecting.
Oh, there goes Stratty again.
I can't. Stratty, if you stop drinking so heavily.
Come on, Stratty. It's the morning. Wait till 5 o'clock.
Yeah. Well, it's 5 o'clock somewhere on this earth. That's Stratty's view.
Okay.
It might be
Tim.
5 o'clock where Tim is.
Yeah.
Yeah. Actually,
Yeah.
wow.
I have a question actually. What
Tim,
strategies?
Tim,
Yeah?
can I see your pretty face, and Nick also?
I unfortunately I don't have a webcam, so it's I'm not able to show my face. I'm sorry.
No problem.
So my question would be, what strategies should anarcho-capitalists seek in order to achieve a private law society? Like there are different strategies such as secession, decentralization, reforms, maybe even revolution or counter economics. So yeah.
Well, there are really only two strategies. One is to pick up a gun and start shooting somebody, and I don't think that we libertarians have any comparative advantage in that. And I think usually when that happens is you get a worse dictator than the one that you overthrow. I think a much better strategy is what we're now doing. We're doing blogs, writing a book, writing an article, giving a speech, become a professor like I do, and I teach my students in Loyola University. By the way, Stratty is
Oh, you cut out, Professor Block?
What should I do?
Am
I back in?
Yeah, you're back in
Yeah,
now.
no, it's not. Again.
So you cut out when you're talking about Stratty. So.
Okay, Stratty's a drunken bum. And I'm a buddy of his. I was just a drunken bum. I got cut out too. So drunken bumism is rampant all around here.
Especially in libertarian circles.
Right. Well, yeah, true. Just human circles. What I was saying is that there are only two ways to do this. One is the violent way and one is the nonviolent way. And I advocate the nonviolent way. It's legal so far, although, who knows what's going to be. But, writing books and articles and giving lectures and setting up a Mises Institute. I'm a big fan of the Mises Institute. And just trying to convince people. But on the other hand, I am a pessimist on converting people to libertarianism. My pessimism arises from sociobiology. Sociobiology is the theory of why are we the way we are now? And the answer is because of what it took to leave genetic code to the next generation 1 million years ago when we were in the caves or in the trees, or wherever we were 1 million years ago. And the idea was that we are very hardwired toward benevolence. Because in our tribe, if I'm sick this week and you help me and next week you're sick and I help you, our tribe survives. Whereas if there was a tribe that didn't have benevolence and I'm sick this week and you don't help me and next week you're sick and I'm not around to help you, that tribe goes by the boards. But are we hardwired to appreciate free enterprise? No, because we lived in groups of 30 or 50 people and there was not much benefit in markets. Look, right now, more people die from bathtub injuries than from snakes. And yet if you ask people, are you afraid of a bathtub? No, nobody's afraid of a bathtub. You ask people, are you afraid of a snake? Yes, they're afraid of a snake. Why? Because 1 million years ago, if you weren't afraid of a snake, you didn't leave too many children to the next generation. Whereas there was no benefit to you of being afraid of a bathtub, there were no bathtubs. So this is why when we have this pandemic now, everyone is against price gouging, because they think that price gouging is selfish. Then they're hardwired against free enterprise. So that's why I think it's sort of like the rock of Sisyphus. You push it up the hill and it comes down. You push it up, it comes down. And yet, so I don't think that we're going to succeed, at least for the next, 100,000 years or whenever it however long it takes for the genetic code to change. So we're not so hardwired against freedom. That is economic freedom. But does this mean that we shouldn't try? Well, I mean, I devote my whole life to it. Why? Because it's so much fun. I can't imagine doing anything else that would be more fun than promoting liberty and promoting free enterprise. And also, I think that it's the ethical thing to do. I have children and grandchildren, and I want to make a better world, so I'm trying. So my pessimism is we're unlikely to succeed. Well, look, Ron Paul, he's the most magnificent libertarian now living. And how many votes does he get when he ran for the LP? 1%. When he ran for the Republican nomination, they were just nasty to him. It's hard to think of a better exponent of libertarianism than Ron Paul or Lou Rockwell or Ayn Rand or these people. We have wonderful people that are promoting liberty, and look at where we are. We're now having a blog of 6 people or 5 people. If we had free enterprise, this blog would go out to, 5 million or 5 billion people. So we have to be realistic. We're not going to succeed in the short run. And by short run, I mean 100,000 years. That's the short run here. But that doesn't mean we shouldn't try. So what technique should we do to maximize it? Well, roughly what we're doing. Engaging in writing a novel like Atlas Shrugged, or movies, or South Park. I'm a big fan of South Park. My favorite character is Cartman, and that's promoting liberty. So I think what we're doing now is the best we can do, and we should keep on doing it and enjoy the promotion of liberty as best we can.
Okay, thank you.
Okay. Monty, do you have any questions?
Yeah, I was.
There we go.
I saw it on Lou Rockwell, something on forced vaccinations by you, Dr. Block.
Something on what?
Forced vaccinations.
Yes.
So, and with this Corona thing going on, I think it'll be relevant. So, what is your take on the libertarian position on forced vaccinations?
Well, this is a very, very complicated issue. And my bottom line is that we really don't know that much about the pandemic. There are so many unanswered questions, empirical questions. Does it spread? If you get it, can you get it again? There are just dozens of questions. If you're asymptomatic, can you spread it? I go back to Typhoid Mary. Typhoid Mary had typhoid, and she was asymptomatic, and she was spreading typhoid. Would it be justified to quarantine her? I'm looking at quarantine and vaccines as sort of a similar kind of a thing. Namely, would it be justified for a limited government or for a private defense agency under anarchocapitalism to go to Typhoid Mary and say, look, Typhoid Mary, we got to quarantine you, because if you're out in the street, you're going to be spreading this deadly disease to other people. And I think it's justified on defensive grounds, namely that she is in effect shooting bullets, only the bullets aren't lead, they're made out of typhoid. So I think there can be a case for quarantine, and I think there can be a case for vaccines as well, compulsory vaccines. That is if they work, but we're not sure if they work. So my view on this is that we libertarians don't have any specialization and comparative advantage. We're not epidemiologists. And yet the view as to whether we should have vaccines or quarantines depends intimately on the facts, and we don't have the facts. So we should take a sort of an agnostic point of view. We shouldn't speak qua libertarians on this issue. We'd say, well, my prudential judgment is thus and such. My prudential judgment is, by the way, that people like me, I'm 78 years old, are very vulnerable. And people under you guys, you all look like you're in your 20s or your late teens. And unless you have some sort of other debilitating disease like diabetes or cancer or heart or obesity or something like that, you're pretty invulnerable to this. And you should get out there and just work and go to restaurants and have normal lives. And I should be very, very careful. That's my prudential judgment, but I make it on the basis of not really knowing what I'm talking about, because I don't know the facts. Whereas my criticism of many libertarians, like Ron Paul, for example, he's very adamant that the government has no right in, house arrest, or forcing people to stay in their houses in order to flatten out the, what do you call it? The
curve.
The curve. So I'm agnostic on this issue. Ron Paul is adamant that we shouldn't have it, and then there are other people that are adamant that we should have it, because they say, well, my freedom to move my fist around ends where your nose starts.
Oh, you cut out again.
Hello?
Oh, okay, you're back. Yeah, you're good now. Yep.
Okay, I'll have to stop drinking. Although I am using cough drops, and who knows what's in these cough drops. So what I'm saying is that Ron Paul and Lou Rockwell and other people are adamant that this is all nonsense, and we shouldn't have any imposition on our liberty. And then there are other people that say, my God, this is a pandemic. And then I don't trust government not to overestimate the number of diseases. The way they count it is if you're 85 and you have a heart condition and you have coronavirus, they count it as coronavirus. Well, that sort of overestimates the danger. So libertarians are split. And I think I'm the only one that says you're both wrong. Both sides are wrong. Namely, you shouldn't be so adamant. You should be more tentative about your advice on this because we just don't know. So I hate to be a wuss or a sissy or something and not, well, they call me Walter Moderate Block, at least in my own words. I'm famous for being moderate. Well, here I'm very moderate. I'm taking a moderate position that we don't know, and therefore it doesn't behoove us to threaten the libertarian name, because one side or the other, one of these days is going to be proven wrong, and then half the libertarians are going to be shown up as being totally wrong. Maybe Ron Paul. I hope Ron Paul is right, because Ron Paul is saying that it's not really much of a disease. But then there are other libertarians that say, oh, this is a horrible disease, and government is absolutely justified in doing it. And I don't know.
Well, as if things goes, Ron Paul will probably be proven right, but we'll have to see.
I hope he is.
Yeah. So I have a question regarding private property, and something that I've always wondered about. Where does your airspace end?
This is the question of low-flying planes.
Yeah, low-flying planes, building overpasses over someone's house.
Right. Well, getting back to roads, one of the objections to private roads is we wouldn't have, what do you call it? What's the word? Expropriation, they call that in Canada. But I want to build a road from New Orleans to, to Atlanta. And how many eminent domain? Is that the word? Eminent domain is the word I was looking for. Do you need eminent domain? That was one of the many objections in my book. Do you need eminent domain? And the idea here is I want to build a road from here to Atlanta, from New Orleans to Atlanta, and it's about, 800 miles or 700 miles, something like that. How many people own property between here and there? I don't know, 500,000 maybe. And I start building a road, and all of a sudden I get Cartman, who says, you know what Cartman is famous for? Screw you guys, screw you guys, screw you guys. That's Cartman. And Cartman owns some land in between here and Atlanta, and he says, screw you, I'm not doing it. And the argument from the other side would be, well, you need eminent domain. You need the government to go to Cartman and say, look, Cartman, we're going to take, so much land. We want to build a 6-lane highway. And each lane is 10 feet wide, and that's 60 feet, and we want to have a median of 40 feet, so that's 100 feet. Well, and we need a little bit on the side, so we're going to take 150 feet and 3 miles long through your property. And you don't like it, too bad, and we'll pay you what we think the land is worth. That's eminent domain. Well, how could we do it without eminent domain? Well, one way is you don't have to go as the crow flies. You could sort of go around Cartman's holdings. Or you could say, well, look, there are 4 or 5 ways that we could go, and we'll buy, what do you call it, rights to buy land. In other words, I go to you, Porter, and I say, well, I'd like to buy your land, but I'm not sure I want to buy it. So I'll buy a right to buy your land at a price that we agree upon. And if I exercise this right, well, then you have to give me the land at the price we've agreed. But I might not exercise it because there are other routes. But suppose Cartman has land holdings that are, 20 miles north and south, or northeast and whatever, southwest. Got that wrong. Can you build a bridge or a tunnel under or over his land? And now we're getting into this thing. What do they call it? I forget the word. Where if you own a square mile of land, you own down into the core, and you own up into the atmosphere. I forget what they call that. You see, if you did, then you couldn't build a bridge under Cartman's land, or you couldn't build a bridge over Cartman's land, or a tunnel under Cartman's land, right? If you had this doctrine where you own a cone-shaped part into the earth and up into the air. But happily, that is incompatible with the libertarian notion of homesteading, because nobody homesteaded, or Cartman didn't homestead anything 30,000 feet above his land, and he didn't homestead anything 300 feet below his land, right? Mm-hmm. So I can build a tunnel under his land and a bridge over his land if he's a holdout. So that would be the answer to the holdout problem, okay? But how high does the bridge have to be? Or how much below does below Cartman's land does the tunnel have to be? And I think the answer emanating from libertarianism, or at least the answer I offered in this book, is it all depends upon, let's take the tunnel underneath. It all depends upon what the land is like. If it's like Manhattan, which is built on a solid rock, you can build pretty much 10 feet under somebody's building. You're not going to cave it in, as long as you don't negatively impact the land holdings of the people that have property there in the first place. On the other hand, in New Orleans, which is built over a swamp, you have to go way, way down under Cartman's land, because if you don't, I'm a long-winded professor. I have to go circuitously answering your question about how much of the air do you own. Well, it depends upon homesteading. How much homesteading did Cartman do, or did any landowner do? He didn't homestead anything 20,000 feet above him, so airplanes that go 20,000 feet above him don't have to put in a nickel every time they go over his house. On the other hand, he's homesteaded peace and quiet, so if you buzz him 10 feet above his house, the noise pollution alone would predicate you couldn't do that, and you'd scare the dickens out of him, so you can't buzz him that way. Well, where is the right answer? Is it maybe 500 feet or 1,000 feet? And now we get into another issue, and it's called the continuum problem. What's the continuum problem? What is the right statutory rape age? We know that if you go to bed with a 5-year-old girl, you are a statutory rapist, even if she agrees, because we don't think she's capable of any such agreement. On the other hand, you go to bed with a 25-year-old woman, and she agrees, you're not a statutory rapist, because we think she can make a decision like that. She's mature enough. Well, where should the cutoff point be? Should it be 14, 15, 16, 17? I don't know. It doesn't emanate from libertarian theory. No political philosophy can say, well, it's 15 years and 6 months. Because what about 15 years and 7 months? Or what about 15 years and 5 months? So you have to arbitrarily draw some point, maybe 17 or 16. And then does it matter if it's a 17-year-old boy and a 17-year-old girl, or a 17-year-old girl and a 50-year-old man? These are problems that no political philosophy can answer. Well, it's the same thing with how high above and below, or I'm now going to punch you guys. Well, are you justified in shooting me in self-defense? No. I mean, the context, it's ridiculous, and I'm very far away from you guys. But if I get really close to you and it's a dark alley and you see the light glinting off my watch and you think it's a knife, then you can shoot me in self-defense. So where is the cutoff point between how high do you go? Well, it depends. There are cases in Manhattan where somebody built over somebody else's property. And I think the courts decided this correctly, namely that they could, because you didn't interfere with the guy below you. The big problem is, well, how about a farmer? He needs rain and he needs sunlight. So my answer to that in this book on roads was, well, if you're going to build a bridge over him, you have to build it a mesh, where you can get the rain through it. And also it has to be translucent so the sun can come through. Sometimes you have bridges. I used to ride a motorcycle, and when you get over those, it's sort of a little scary, right? But so you'd have to, the answer to your question is, you can do whatever you want as long as you don't interfere with the prior owner's property rights. And how high does this have to be above the guy's land? I don't know, maybe 5,000 feet or something like that.
Okay. Makes sense.
Thank you.
Who wants to do the next question?
I just had a quick question from a friend. Assuming if Mises U happens, will you attend this year?
I can't hear you.
Mises University, will you be attending this year?
I won't. One, because I'm isolating now. and there'd be a crowd there. I've been at the Mises University for many, many years, but I have a personal problem. My wife and I have a bi-coastal marriage, and she's sort of unhappy that I'm not spending enough time with her. And my main time that I do spend with her is during Christmas and the summer, and the Mises University is during the summer. So I'm very loath to spend a whole week or even a few days. And, you know, it takes one whole day to get there, one whole day to get back. She's in Vancouver, Canada. So I've been invited to do it, and I'd love to be there. I'll tell you what, if they have it and they'll allow me to Zoom a lecture, I'd happily Zoom a lecture. So my heart is with them, and I'm a big fan of the Mises Institute. I contribute to LouRockwell.com regularly, and I have a blog there. And I didn't think of that. They have invited me, and I declined, but I'm now, thanks to you guys, I'm such a dummy. I didn't think of this before. I'm going to write to them and say, look, please include me. Not physically, but I will Zoom a lecture and have questions and answers and stuff like that. So thanks for that question. So there are two reasons I won't be there this summer. They might not even have it physically there this summer. They had the Austrian Economic Research Center in March, and they canceled it. With what I know now is they shouldn't have canceled it. They should just sort of put it online. So I'm going to make that suggestion to them as soon as I get off.
Thank
I
you.
think their plan is to have it online if they can't have it in person. But hopefully they can, because Stratty and I are supposed to be roommates there. So that'll be pretty cool.
You can roommate over Zoom.
That's what we're doing right now.
That's true.
Okay. So if nobody, is anybody going to take Andrew's question who couldn't be here today, or should I just go ahead and read it out for him?
You go ahead, Jay.
All right. So, yeah, like we said, we have a co-host who's missing today because he's over in the Tennessee rally spreading the message. But he had a philosophical question for you, which it's a little long, so forgive it. I didn't have time to condense it for him. But he's going on about the veil of ignorance. So he says, the veil of ignorance is a concept that revolves around the structuring of society under the pretense that fairness is justice. The idea is explained by imagining yourself being able to choose exactly how society would be structured. However, you know nothing except for the fact that you will be in that society. You know not your race, gender, socioeconomic position, talents, weaknesses, etc. So the proper way to go about things is to establish society to be the, sorry about my dog, to be the most fair but not inherently the most equal. Since you do not know where you would fall in the society, you would want to make sure you have the best chances at a decent life, even if you are the lowest of the low in society. You'll want this out of your own self-interest, of course. Rawls knows that a truly equal society, a communist one, because Rawls was dirty pinko, is not possible, since a managerial class would rise up and make the whole this a big contradiction. Not only is the contradiction there, but it's also obvious that a brain surgeon should earn more than a fast food worker, so having true equality would be unfair to those who put more work in. So with that explanation, would an ANCAP society be considered the most fair for all of those involved, both born and unborn? Would you want an ANCAP society while looking through the veil, so to speak?
Well, this is Rawls, R-A-W-L-S. John
Yeah.
Rawls is very famous for this veil of ignorance kind of a thing, and therefore we should have a quasi-egalitarian society, not exactly equality, but I think the idea was that the only justification for having poor, some people poorer than others, like you said that the brain surgeon should have more money than the guy who sells hot dogs, is that the guy who sells hot dogs would be better off if the brain surgeon had more money, because then if he needed a brain surgeon, there'd be one. Whereas if you didn't pay the brain surgeon more than the hot dog guy, there wouldn't be enough brain surgeons to take care of the hot dog guys. So the only justification for inequality would be that it would even help the poor. I think that's roughly what Rawls is saying. The person who has eviscerated and obliterated Rawls and spent 100 or 150 pages out of his book was Robert Nozick. Robert Nozick wrote this book, Anarchy, State, and Utopia, and he must have spent 150 pages just digging in at Rawls. And I'm not going to, give 150 pages worth of it, but I'll give a little bit of it. First of all, Rawls is a little bit weak because he only applies it to the United States. He was asked, well, shouldn't we apply your system to the whole world? And Rawls said, oh, no. Because, Rawls was a professor at Harvard, and he had a certain living standard, and, he had a car and an air conditioner and a color TV and a nice car and a nice house. And if we applied the Rawlsian system to the whole world, he would be living roughly like the guy who asks if you want fries with that. Namely, he was a little inconsistent, a little hypocritical on his own scheme. Another problem is in economics, we have this thing called risk avoider, risk preferer, or risk neutral. Well, he's a risk avoider. Well, where do you get risk avoiding as the be all and end all? People who go to Las Vegas are risk preferers, and they would prefer more inequality. And then there are people who are risk neutral. So why should Rawls' taste against risk be somehow philosophically oriented? Another person, Hans Hoppe, a buddy of mine, and I think a brilliant philosopher, says, well, Rawls is talking about hypothetical. Here we are, individuals with different talents and different abilities. And, so Rawls is sort of airy-fairy, whereas, let's get down to reality. And then another argument against this is Rawls is only talking about transferring money, taking money from rich and giving it to the poor, so that you don't have too much inequality. Well, why just money? Why not the things that make money in the first place? Why not the things that determine the diversity of wealth in the first place? Say IQ points. Now, Rawls got a lot of IQ points. Would he be willing to give up 50 of those IQ points? Not to have absolute equality of IQ for everybody, but you have to have only this much inequality. I'll bet you Rawls wouldn't want to do that. I'll bet you Rawls wouldn't want to do that for his kids, volunteer his kids' IQ points. And how about follically challenged? Look at me, I'm follically challenged. You guys have got hair growing all over you. Well, I don't know about Stratty. I can't see his hair, but I assume he's got plenty there. Look at that. That's unfair. And you guys should give me some follicles. Nozick was very famous for all sorts of machines transferring IQ points. We don't have them, but suppose we had them. Rawls, again, would be very loath to follow his own principles, whereas we libertarians can follow our principles. Our principles are, keep your goddamn mitts to yourself. Don't be grabbing other people or their property without their permission, right? So, sadomasochism is okay, as long as it's voluntary between consenting adults. I have to tell you my SM joke. The masochist says to the sadist, beat me. And the sadist says, no. So we libertarians, we can follow our own principles. Rawls can't follow his principles. He won't even apply them internationally to the whole world. So what good are your principles if you don't want to apply them everywhere? We libertarians are willing to apply our principles everywhere. We think that the initiation of coercion is improper, and it's improper in the United States, it's improper in Canada, it's improper in Africa, improper in China, improper everywhere. We can generalize our principles. He can't. So this would be my rejection of the Rawlsian equality, egalitarianism stuff. And then there's this other thing. Can I draw on the board here? Is there a way? Let me see if I can draw on the board here. I now teach a class, but I don't think I can.
I think you could. You can show us your screen. I think that's possible.
Now I've lost everybody.
No, we're still here.
We're still here, but I can't draw it, and if I can't draw it, it's going to be really hard for me to do it. Well, I'll explain it without drawing it. We have this thing, diminishing marginal utility. The first dollar you get is really precious to you because it's the difference between living and dying. The second dollar is less important. The last dollar that Bill Gates has is a difference between him, what do you call it? lighting a cigar with $100 bill or with a $1,000 bill. So the idea is what we do is we take money from the rich and we give it to the poor, and the rich lose less utils than the poor gain. And therefore, that would be the economic justification of egalitarianism. The problem with that is, from an Austrian economics point of view, hold on, I have to take a short break. I have to toke up on another cough drop, because if I don't have a cough drop, I run out of whatever it is that keeps me going. Okay, so the idea here is once you put something on a graph, you're talking cardinal utility or counting utils, and there ain't no such thing as utils. We Austrians are not against counting things. We believe that there's such a thing as height or weight or speed or temperature. 98.6 is a good temperature. But we don't believe that there are units of happiness. We're ordinalists, not cardinalists. Namely, you can prefer vanilla ice cream to chocolate or chocolate to vanilla, but you can't say I like vanilla twice as much as chocolate, or that I like vanilla 10 utils worth and vanilla 5 utils worth, and therefore twice as much. So this way of arguing is wrong. And also, who says that they're both on the same on the same diminishing curve? Maybe the rich guy's got a higher curve. I wish I could illustrate this on the board. In which case, you would be taking more utils away from him than you'd be giving to the poor guy, because the poor guy is just a slob, and he's in the gutter, and he doesn't really appreciate anything. Whereas the rich guy, you take $1 away from him, and he goes berserk. So you have interpersonal comparisons for utility, which is a problem that most economists, most Austrians would reject. So this would be some of my arguments against egalitarianism. They're hypocrites. They don't apply it to the world. They don't apply it to IQ points or beauty or hair follicles. And this whole idea of taking money from the rich and giving it to the poor. You take money from the rich and give it to the poor, and the rich got less of an incentive to be rich, and the poor's got less of an incentive to become rich, because if he's rich, he doesn't get the welfare. And then they have this, universal, Andrew Yang was pushing this.
The UBI.
UBI, Universal
Basic Income.
Basic Income, give everyone $10,000. That's what they're doing now with the virus. Everyone gets 1,000 or 2,000 or something like that. Well, this is not really exactly libertarian. It's theft. And you'd think at least Christians would oppose it, because in the Bible, it says, thou shalt not steal. And this is stealing.
Yeah. All right. So we have 2 more from Monty and Tim. So who wants to go first?
I would go first. So there's currently a discussion within the libertarian community if we should seek unity with left-wing libertarians or with the with right-wingers in order to achieve our goals. And like I mentioned, the libertarian community is really divided because of that. So your opinion regarding that would be interesting.
Well, I'm a Murray Rothbard fan on this and on virtually everything else. And Murray had the policy of making friends or alliances or contributions or cooperation with everyone, with left-wing people on areas where we agreed with left-wing people, on right-wing issues where we agreed with right-wing people. For example, the left wing is a little bit better than the right wing on personal liberties. They want to legalize marijuana. They want to legalize prostitution, although the feminists are a little wonky on that one. They want to legalize gambling. They want to legalize victimless crimes. And when it comes to legalizing marijuana or cocaine or heroin or whatever, we make an alliance with the left. On the other hand, the conservatives are a little bit better on economics. And the left wing is horrible on economics. So when it comes to the minimum wage, the right wing is against minimum wage, and we now cooperate with the right wing. And when it comes to getting rid of rent control or having free trade or whatever the economic issues are, we cooperate with the right wing. I remember I was a member of the Peace and Freedom Party. This is during the war in Vietnam, and we libertarians wanted the war in Vietnam to end. We thought that it was unjust. And the Peace and Freedom Party consisted of Progressive Labor, which was the Maoist group, and Trotskyites, which is the Trotsky group, and us libertarians, and there were about 10 of us. Murray was our leader, and we were cooperating with the Progressive Labor because on certain issues. And I remember one time I was writing my dissertation on rent control, and we libertarians had a compromise with the Progressive Labor on gold standard and rent control, and I had to vote for rent control, and they had to vote for the gold standard. And, I said, Murray, how can I do this? He said, shut up, vote for, vote for rent control. And I did, but I had my fingers crossed, so it didn't count. It was just sort of silly. Just the idea of being in Murray's presence was, overwhelming for me. But we wanted the war in Vietnam to end, and there were very few libertarians, and Murray thought that by putting his weight on the scale there, we could help get out of Vietnam and also make a few converts of the commies. But we do the same thing with right-wing people. The Federalist Society is sort of 2/3 conservative and 1/3 libertarian. And I support the Federalist Society. I've given lectures for them, and so I think the answer to the question of who should we cooperate with, we should cooperate with everybody, but never violate our own principles. And the way to do that is where we agree with the lefties, cooperate with them, and where we agree with the righties, cooperate with them, but always realize that we are unique. We are sui generis. We are neither right nor left. The problem is that a lot of people, think that libertarianism is part of the right. We're not part of the right. We are equidistant. The way I see it, it's sort of like an equilateral triangle. Again, I wish I had the blackboard or the whiteboard here. We're an equilateral triangle. We're on one side, the lefties are on another side, and the righties are on another side. We are not righties. We are unique. We're special. We're a lot of times they'll give you that survey, are you a lefty or a righty? And I come out right in the middle. Walter Moderate Block, because on all the economic issues, I'm a righty, and on all the personal liberties, I'm a lefty, and I come out, and then they say I'm inconsistent, and then they criticize Murray for being inconsistent because he worked with the lefties and he worked with the righties. Well, there are very few libertarians, and if we want to have any effect and we want to convert them, we have to show, that look, you lefties, you favor freedom in personal liberties. Well, how about economics? And you righties, you favor personal freedom in economics. Well, how about personal liberties? It's all the same. It's all part of one ball of wax, or all part of one philosophy. Freedom, 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 and it applies everywhere. So don't tell us that freedom only applies in personal liberties but not in economics, or only in economics but not in personal liberties. It applies everywhere across the board, and that's our message.
Yeah, I agree with that a lot.
Yeah, that was interesting. Thank you.
All right, Dr. Block, I have one more question for you before you leave. But first, you did promise me you were going to tell a joke on the podcast.
Okay.
About a certain Indian kid.
It was a specific joke that I told my class because, I teach a class of 75 minutes, and I tell them economics is boring and we need a break, and I have to tell them a joke at roughly the 45-minute point. So, here is a joke about an Indian student. It was the first day at school in the USA, and a new Indian student named Jayant entered the 4th grade. The teacher said, let's begin by reviewing some American history. Who said, give me liberty or give me death? The teacher saw a sea of blank faces except for Jayant, who had his hand up. And he said, Patrick Henry, 1775. Very good, said the teacher. Next question. Who said government of the people, by the people, for the people shall not perish from the earth? Again, no response except for Jayant. Abraham Lincoln, 1863, said Jayant. The teacher snapped at the class. Class, you should be ashamed. Jayant, who is new to our country, knows more about our history than you do. She heard a loud whisper, F the Indians. Who said that? She demanded. Jayant put his hand up and said, General Custer, 1862. At that point, the student in the back said, I'm going to puke. The teacher glanced around the room and said, all right, who said that? Again, Jayon says, George Bush to the Japanese Prime Minister in 1991. Now furious, another student yells, oh yeah, suck this. Jayon jumps out of his chair, waving his hand and shouts to the teacher, Bill Clinton to Monica Lewinsky, 1996. Now with almost mob hysteria said, you little shit, if you say anything else, I'll kill you. Jayon frantically yells at the top of his voice, Michael Jackson to the child witness testifying against him in 2004. The teacher fainted. And as the class gathered around the teacher on the floor, someone said, oh shit, we're screwed. And Jayon said quietly, I think it was Lehman Brothers, September 4th, 2008. That's the joke I told my students.
Oh my God. Oh, that is
a good
amazing.
one.
That was amazing. So, Dr. Block, a lot of us here are listeners to the Tom Woods Show, and we all tuned in for Walter Block Week, and we all remember the monumental moment where Tom Woods had enough of you towards the end, and it was hilarious. But, we are about the polar opposite in quality to the Tom Woods Show and in standards, so we'd love to hear your case for voluntary cannibalism.
Well, I wrote Defending the Undefendable 1 and Defending the Undefendable 2. And now I'm working on Defending the Undefendable 3. And I forgot what I put in each book, but if the cannibalism in the first two, he'll be in the third one.
Yeah, I believe you're saying it's going to be in the third one that you're currently writing.
Okay. I forget which ones I put in which book. Well, there are cases where a bunch of sailors are marooned on a rowboat and they've got no food. Or there was the Spelunkian explorers. They were in a cave or something like that. And they were all going to die because they had no food. And they agreed to draw straws or throw dice or whatever it is. And whoever lost, the others would eat him and stay alive. Would this be justified? Well, our philosophy is anything voluntary. And voluntary cannibalism is voluntary. And not only cannibalism, but slavery. Voluntary slavery is justified. The example I like to use is I have 2 children. God forbid one of them is a horrible disease, and it'll cost $10 million to cure him. And one of you guys is very rich. Bill Gates is very rich and wants me to be his slave, and I'll go to his plantation and give economics lessons. And I make a deal and I say, look, give me the $10 million. I'll give it to my son's doctors. We'll save his life and I'll be your slave. And we'll both benefit. And because every trade is beneficial in the ex ante sense, every trade with no exception. Why? Because I value my son's life more than my freedom. And Bill Gates values my servitude more than the 10 million. So we both gain. Well, there are very few libertarians who agree with me on this. Murray Rothbard, for example, disagrees with me on this. I think there are a few. One of them is Robert Nozick. He agrees with me on this. But that's a different issue, who agrees. I think this is absolutely correct. There's nothing wrong with voluntary slavery. And I was doing an interview with the New York Times on libertarianism. They were trying to derail Rand Paul's presidential candidacy in 2016. And the idea was he hangs around with weirdos, and I was one of the 10 weirdos. Mm-hmm. And I was trying to explain libertarianism, and they just weren't getting it, either because they were too stupid, which I doubt, or they just wanted me to give myself enough rope. So I finally gave them the atom bomb one, namely voluntary slavery. Mm-hmm. And then they quoted me as saying that I favored actual slavery. I had a full head of hair before that interview, and look at me now. I cut out all my hair. I don't favor actual slavery. Actual slavery is an abomination. Actual slavery was kidnapping on a massive scale with torture thrown in and murder. But voluntary slavery is a different issue. So the idea behind defending the undefendable is anything voluntary between consenting adults. Robert Nozick, again, says this thing called capitalist acts between consenting adults. Just sort of stick it to the left, because they're always in favor of anything between consenting adults, but not capitalist acts. Well, voluntary slavery and voluntary cannibalism are capitalist acts in the sense that they are commercial agreements. And we might not like them. And the same thing with child pornography. If the only way to save the child's life is to allow him to be raped in a child porn movie, life before dishonor. I mean, if you're going to be a good guardian, the key is to keep that kid alive. Okay, he's raped and you can get therapy later. But if you let him die, you're not a good therapist, a good guardian. There's this case, I forget who it is. Some woman was
Terry Schiavo.
Terry Schiavo, thanks. I forgot her name. She was, on life support, and the husband, who was a guardian, wanted to pull the plug. The parents wanted to keep her going. Well, as soon as the court sided with the husband, and I say, as soon as you say pull the plug, that means you're not a good guardian. The court ruled wrongly on this one. The court should have ruled against the husband, and the parents and the siblings wanted to keep her alive. So that's about it. That's an hour and 15 minutes. Yep. So I'm delighted to be with you, and thanks for having me on your show.
Of course, thank you very much.
And it's just as good as Tom Wood's show. Well, not just as good, but it's very, very, very good.
Well, we'd love to have you back. Thank you very much for your time.
Take care.
All right, too.
Perfect. All right.
And next time, get me a whiteboard.
Don't worry, Dr. Block.